Hello, welcome back to Recovery Demystified. I'm Early, I'll be your host. Recovery Demystified is a 501c3 nonprofit based out of Northwest Arkansas. We have addiction recovery support groups at the Fayetteville Public Library every Monday at 6 o'clock. If you want to come, we do science-based education, and then we have a little group discussion about our strengths and struggles in recovery and addiction. People at any place in that spectrum are welcomed if you want to help a loved one and you want to speak, if you are in the thick of it and you need support, and if you're in recovery, it's really important to provide an example of your experience and your knowledge and everything that you went through so that folks who are struggling can see an example of someone who's made it through it. It's hugely instrumental to see that representation. So stop by the library every Monday at 6 o'clock and drop in to join our support groups. Maybe you'll learn something new. Today, I have another interview episode. I have my sweet friend, Natalie. It's interesting, since I've started this nonprofit, it seems like everyone has their own story of close encounters with addiction, whether it is themselves, a loved one, a family member, a friend, a coworker, someone close to them. It just seems like no one has gone unscathed by the pain that addiction causes in our society. And Natalie brings up a lot of brilliant points, a lot of which are concerning destigmatization and bringing these conversations out into the light. Her father suffered pretty severely from addiction, so she was exposed to that at a young age, and she was also exposed to that addiction being covered up for a long time and not being really explained to her. And then when she started to have her own mental health struggles, that was also brushed under the rug. So what she brings up and what's really important to speak about is that these struggles are very, very common. It happens to almost all of us. Having an encounter with someone close to us who is addicted, having our own struggles with mental health, like, honestly, show me someone who has survived life as a human and hasn't had times of struggle with their mental health, because I do not believe that person exists. And that being said, we are not having enough conversations about it, especially considering how common it all is. So I'm so grateful to have Natalie on today, talking about what it is like to grow up with a parent with like a pretty severe substance use issue, and then what it's like to grow into adulthood and be exposed to all of the substances of the world and reflect on the childhood, reflect on the mental health struggles, and choose a path that's right for you. She also returned to moderate use, which is a thing. So I bring up Dr. Nzinga Harrison a lot because she's brilliant, but through listening to her podcast and reading her books, I was introduced to the idea of pre-addiction, which is starting to become more common in the medical vernacular. Pre-addiction is basically like when people are experiencing consequences to their use of drugs or alcohol, but they're not like super hardcore addicted quite yet. And I think it's important to discuss pre-addiction because if more folks would be able to catch themselves in this phase before like permanent chemical changes are made in the brain, then it is possible for people to bring themselves back to moderate use or abstinence. But if we're brushing all of our feelings and use under the rug because it's not culturally normal to talk about it, then people won't catch themselves in pre-addiction and they will migrate into mild, moderate, severe substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder. So I think I'm not like telling everyone it is possible or good to go back to moderate use, but if a person is in this pre-addiction stage, like according to Dr. Nzinga Harrison, many, many, many people who are in this stage return to moderate use. And that's okay, and it works for them. For a lot of us, especially if you're listening to an addiction recovery podcast, maybe we're past that stage, and moderate use like isn't a practical goal for us. So it's going to be like a know thyself type of thing, but let's bring these conversations into the light. Let's destigmatize speaking about our alcohol and substance use. Let's destigmatize speaking about our mental health struggles. And let's nip it in the bud. A stitch in time saves 9. And if we can bring it all out into the light and treat whatever pain we're experiencing with care and dignity in that moment, then perhaps we will save a lot of people from getting to that point of being in a severe addiction. And I guess that's all I got to say for y'all today. Without further ado, here is my interview with Natalie. Hi, Natalie. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm so happy to have you here. Will you start by introducing yourself to the listeners? Let them know your pronouns and a little bit about yourself. What makes you you?
Yes. So my name is Natalie. I use she, her pronouns. Currently, I'm 21 years old. I am a college student. I am studying sociology, Southern studies, and African American studies. So basically, I'm a nerd. I love to read. I love history. Apparently, I love trying to solve all the world's problems. So yeah, that's it really, as far as school goes.
Cool. Yeah, you're involved with some sort of like volunteer program at the college, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I serve on the executive board of the Volunteer Action Center at my university. So I do a lot with our alumni and just engaging students in volunteering. Volunteering has always been really important to me. It's really, important, I think, for people to find community in that way, and give service to others, aside from philanthropy. So
that's great. And if there's students listening and they want to get involved with the volunteering program at UA, how did they do that?
Yeah, so come and see me on the second floor of the Union, room 241. I pretty much live there. So you can always come by. Our office is a safe space for everyone. All students are welcome. So if you want to just come hang out, get some resources, get to know our board and things like that, please come by.
Awesome. Thanks for telling us about that. And I also think volunteering is super important. You get involved in your community, you get to learn what you're passionate about, and you get to give back. And the secret of volunteering is that it also makes you feel really good. So
it does. It really does.
It's a little bit selfish, but it's the best kind of selfishness we can have.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's get right into it. We're here to talk about your story in your life with addiction. I'm curious if you'll let us know first what it was like to be a kid, then maybe your first contact with alcohol or substances, sort of when you started to realize that maybe it could be a problem, and then how things went from there.
Yeah, so growing up, I grew up with a single mother. I have one older sister. She is about 2.5 years older than me. So we were really a unit, a trio growing up. My mom, she worked a ton growing up. We were poor. We got by with what we had, but she's always worked 2 to 3 jobs my whole life to support my sister and I. So when she was at work and we weren't at school, I spent a lot of time with my great grandma, and the reason for that is my dad suffers from drug addiction. His addiction started way before marriage and children came along. He was in a really bad car accident when he was, I think, 17, 18. Shattered his femur, had to get pins, rods, the whole nines. And obviously was prescribed prescription painkillers for that. He was temporarily disabled from that accident and, had to go through extensive rehab for that. So we also suffer from a rare genetic bone disease. So my dad, my sister, and I both have that. So he, in his accident, started on prescription painkillers, and he never stopped. So at first, based on what my mom has told me, she didn't really see his addiction until after my sister and I were born and we were really young.
What did the accident happen before they met each other, while they're already together, or?
Yeah, so it happened, I think, like right before my dad and my mom started dating.
So maybe he was using, but maybe it wasn't quite apparent or a huge problem yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Because his pain very much was real, He was suffering from chronic pain due to the accident and the bone condition. So it wasn't that his pain wasn't real. It very much was. But marriage and children were never the intended goal of my parents' relationship. It was more of just a casual dating situation that ended up with my mom being pregnant with my older sister. And, coming from some religious grandparents, my mom was coerced, I guess, into marrying my dad. So while my mom was pregnant with my sister, they got married. And, it was, happy. It was good. We're having a family, all that good stuff. Obviously, I'm here, so the marriage counted for something. But I remember my mom telling me that she didn't realize that my dad had a problem until it was one night. He would, go through his refills and his prescriptions so fast. And in the town I grew up in, there was a 24-hour pharmacy. And he would lay in bed at night until midnight when he could go and refill his next prescription. And he would get up out of bed at midnight, go to the 24-hour pharmacy and refill his painkillers. And that's when my mom told me, she said, I knew that it was a problem.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like he was experiencing tolerance to the painkillers, and maybe they weren't doing what he wanted them to do anymore. So he was kind of stacking them up, taking a larger amount than prescribed just to, try to catch up with that pain.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's where my mom really struggled with grappling with the idea that he was an addict, because I know she felt bad for him, knowing that, he was in pain, but it got to a point where it was excessive and it was, he was over medicating himself.
Yeah.
So once she kind of came to that realization is when she noticed that the other symptoms she had been noticing were a product of his addiction, his aggression towards my mom. My mom, she's a survivor of domestic violence. And I didn't know that until, honestly, a few years ago.
Wow.
But that his inability to hold a job, all of those things.
And this is all before you were born?
This was right after I was born. I was very, very young when my parents got divorced. I think I was maybe a year old, year and a half.
So you definitely don't remember it, I guess. Yeah.
I don't remember. And a lot of, the stories that I'm telling is by my sister's memory. She was a little bit older than I was, so she remembers a lot more than I do. But, you know, there's also parts that she doesn't remember, you know, just out of repression and blocking all of that out that I do remember. So throughout my life, we've kind of been able to connect the dots and put the puzzle together.
Yeah. So as you're growing up, you're a little kid, what did your life look like then? What was your first, like, kind of acknowledgement or experience with understanding that substances exist?
Yeah, I think so. After my parents' divorce, you know, my mom was working a bunch, and I spent a lot of time with my great grandma because my dad ended up, you know, moving in with my great grandparents. And so when I wasn't at home with my mom, I was with my great grandparents and my dad at their house, and I always kind of knew that something was abnormal about him, and just the way that he, you know, like, why is there a man in a car pulling up to the house and he goes out to, you know, reach in the window and then says goodbye? You know, I'm like, who is this person? And, you know, just changes in his behavior. You know, sometimes he was very self-isolated, didn't want to talk to anybody. I could tell that he was, you know, aggressive towards my grandparents. And then other times it was like, oh, let's go outside, let's go play, let's, you know, do all these cool things. So his behavior was very much an up and down journey, and I noticed that very young.
Do you remember, like, how it made you feel when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think it was confusing because, you know, I saw my dad as someone who was like, oh, he wants to, you know, go out in the yard and play outside and play sports and, you know, do all these fun things. But I also, you know, saw parts of him that I was like, that's not him. You know, that's not the person that I know. And it was confusing. And then I think I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. We were in the bedroom at my great-grandparents' house in my dad's room. I was just laying on the bed watching TV, and I remember he comes in real fast. He lifts up the mattress and pulls something out from under the mattress. And you know those, like, little jelly pill holders, like pocket pill holders, is what I saw. And I saw him go in the bathroom. And then he came back out, and I was still just laying on the bed watching TV, and I see him lift the mattress back up, stuff it back under there. And I was like, well, that's really strange, because why is he hiding it? You know, if it's medicine, you know, I'm, you know, 5 years old. I'm like, well, if it's medicine, you know, you just go get it out of the cabinet, you know?
Yeah, and kids are really curious, and they're actually, like, oftentimes much smarter and noticing a lot more than we think they are.
Yeah. And, you know, once I had that experience, I noticed that even more, that there would be times where he was just lethargic, you know, out of it, just laying on the bed, couldn't get a response, you know, couldn't get any movement out of him. You know, also when I was younger, before he moved in with my great-grandparents, he did still live in the house that I, you know, was brought home, you know, to when I was a baby. And, you know, there would be times where it's the middle of the day, he's locked himself in the bedroom, you know, is just asleep, passed out. My sister and I are just kind of fending for ourselves, you know, in the living room.
Wow.
You know, the grass would get so tall and overgrown that we would have the city called on us. And, you know, we had a dog, too, and our dog was, like, skin and bones at one point. And so the neighbors, you know, called, like, a welfare check, I guess. And I remember, you know, the police coming to our house and stuff, and that's really when ultimately my mom, you know, made the decision to get full custody of my sister and I, and that's when he ultimately moved in with my grandparents.
What age are you then?
I was probably 4 years old when that happened. And then he lived with my grandparents up until I was about 12. But I remember when I was about 7 or 8 by this point. I hadn't been sat down and told that my dad had a problem. My sister and I, we knew, but it was confusing, you know. And no one had ever said it. It was always, oh, your dad has really bad allergies. That's why he's at the hospital. Yeah. Your dad, he had a really bad allergy attack. That was the code word.
Yeah, sounds like they're just maybe trying to protect you from the pain and hardship of the reality or something.
Yeah,
maybe.
And that's always been my family's MO, is like, let's not talk about it. That seems to be the easiest option. But when I was about 7 or 8, we had an incident. My mom finally agreed to let my dad take us on a little family vacation to Branson for the weekend. So, you know, my sister and I are so excited. We're on our way to Branson. And although my dad had his moments where he was more aggressive, he had never once raised his voice, gotten, you know, defensive towards my sister and I. I had only seen it towards other people. And we get to Branson, and at this point, he's in full-blown withdrawals. And I remember my sister and I were like, let's go to the pool, you know, let's go out to Branson, let's explore. And I remember he snaps at my sister and I. I don't remember exactly what was said, but I was like, wow, that was mean. You know, I've never seen him react that way to us. Yeah. Ultimately, I'm not sure if it was some sort of self-inflicted harm or what the case was, but I just remember him like, I need to go to the doctor. I need to get to the emergency room. So I'm not sure what he did or what the excuse was, but on our trip to Branson, we end up at the emergency room. And when he is satisfied and gets his prescription that he's looking for, you know, it's basically time to leave at that point. We get in the car to drive back home, and my sister and I see him, you know, open the pill bottle, dump something into his hand, pop it, and we get in the car and we're going.
Oh my goodness.
We're going back home. We stop eventually halfway home, I assume. My dad is violently vomiting blood and tissue and just all types of stuff.
Oh my God.
I had never seen anything like that. My sister and I are in the back seat of the car. We're pulled over on the side of the road, and I think that's when I know that. You know, and so we get back, we tell my grandma immediately. My dad goes home, goes in the back room, shuts the door, and we tell my grandma, we saw Dad take these pills when we got in the car. And ultimately, I think that saved his life, because shortly after that, he overdosed and was in kidney failure because he had taken so many drugs that he went into kidney failure. Wow. He was life-flighted to Springfield, was in the ICU for several days. And after that incident is when my mom sat my sister and I down for the first time and looked at us and said, your dad has a problem. He is suffering from an addiction to these pills. I think I was like 7 or 8 at this point, and that's the first time that someone had actually sat me down and told me what was going on.
By the time you'd already figured it out, you're like, right. I could tell.
Yeah, actually. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I think I saw that coming.
Yeah. But. So as life went on, I'm sure that you were exposed to substances, like as a kid growing up. We all go through like DARE class and then see weed for the first time and everything. Like how did your experience seeing addiction firsthand in this like very close visceral way? What was it like for you growing up and maturing and getting out into the world and seeing that substances are also available to you?
Yeah. After that incident, everyone in my family made it a point to let my sister and I know, you are predisposed to this as well. You have to be very careful about what you do, and you can't just be out taking substances for fun because you will get addicted. So I learned from a very young age, the dangers of that. As far as my first experience goes, when ages, 0 to 12, 13, I was like, I'm never going to do that. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to do any of that, And then when I was about 12, 13 years old, my great-grandma passed away. And that was like the set-off point for both me and my father. So after that happened, I still have not seen my father to this day. I have not communicated with him. That was 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago.
Wow. Did he ever, after the experience of getting life flighted or anything, did he ever have, bouts of recovery, or did you see any part of that as his story at all?
Yeah. He ended up going to rehab after that, and I remember my mom telling us he was going to go away and get help, and then he came back, and I remember he was telling my sister and I, look how bright my eyes are, look how white my eyes are, and look how healthy and strong I am. And, he rode that for a while, and eventually ended up, relapsing again. And I think went back to rehab. That cycle, repeated itself for a while. And, up to the point that I was 12, 13, and my grandma dying, he was still, repeating that cycle. And then after, we all took my grandma's death very, very hard. It was very hard.
Yeah.
And after that, he never stopped. And, he ended up doing some very unforgivable, violent things to my family. And that resulted in him going to jail, going to prison for a while. And so it was at that point that, my mom decided that we were not going to talk to him, see him, anything like that.
Yeah.
She gave us the opportunity of you want to write your dad a letter in jail? And I'm like, no, I don't. I really don't. And still, I still haven't seen him or anything to this day. But after the death of my grandma is when it kind of got to that teenage experimental phase, I would go have a sleepover with my friends and they're like, oh, my mom has, alcohol in the fridge, let's steal it, So I think I was probably 13, 14 years old, the first time I ever drank alcohol or anything. And it started, just as that, teenage rebellion. Let's steal our parents' alcohol out of the fridge, Yeah.
Do you remember how that first exposure, that first drink felt?
Oh, yeah, it was awesome. I was like, this is so fun. This is just so carefree. I'm like, this is what being an adult feels like, I didn't have a care in the world. I didn't. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it sounds terrible, but I'm like, well, no wonder people, drink alcohol and are addicted to drugs, I'm like, well, no wonder, because I'm having the time of my life with my best friends. We're in her bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah. And in the beginning, it is extremely euphoric, and it does feel wonderful at first. Yeah.
And I think the biggest satisfaction I got out of it is I was like, I know that I'm not supposed to be doing this. For one, I'm 14, 15 years old. Mm-hmm. And two, all my mom has ever told me is that I'm going to get addicted to drugs and alcohol. So for some reason, dealing with the grief that I was suffering and, the sort of abandonment of my father, you know, I was like, it just made me want to do it even more for some reason. Because I was like, I know I'm not supposed to be doing this, but that just makes it all the more fun.
Yes. The teenage rebellion it's a strong motivator.
Oh, it is.
You tell someone not to do something, it's exactly what they're going to do.
It's going to make me want to do it 100 times more. So that's really how it started, is the teenage rebellion. And then as I got a little bit older, end of like junior high, beginning of high school, is when at the time, I knew that I was depressed, and I knew that I was, you know, suffering mentally. But again, with the MO in my family being, we don't talk about it, you know, people have it way worse than you. There's no reason for you to be depressed. So I never, you know, got the help that I needed for that when I was a teenager. And I just went along with it. And, you know, at that point, the partying and the drinking and all that became my kind of, you know, escape from all of that. Yes, that actually does make you more depressed now that I'm older. It actually makes you more depressed.
Yes. But I mean, it's also, you're doing whatever you can to survive. And if we're not taught healthy coping skills, we're not taught to address our feelings, we reach out for help and we're told that our feelings are invalid, you know, like, if you don't have the skills, resources, the guidance to like help you work through that stuff, you're going to do the best you can. And sometimes the best we can do then is just mere survival. And if your ability to survive is facilitated by suppressing the emotions, then that's just like your body and your mind's like intelligent way just to find a way to survive when all of your other choices have been sort of like squelched out. So
yeah, I definitely used the partying and the drinking. I started smoking weed. I never, you know, people around me did other things besides that, you know, the pills and the, you know, cocaine, surprisingly, at such a young age. I don't know how they even acquired that. You know, the psychedelics and the whatever, you know, I knew just from my own experience that was not in the cards for me. So really, I just stuck to the abusing alcohol and weed, which I'm glad that, you know, that's all that I did. But, you know, I also, you know, I wouldn't say that I was addicted to alcohol, but I definitely abused alcohol at a very young age. And, you know, nobody knew that. You know, my mom didn't know that. My older sister didn't know that. It was just, you know, with my friends on the weekends. And then it got to a point where I was like, you know, getting alcohol so I could just drink alone in my room at night, you know, like before I have 10th grade the next day, which, you know. So that, you know, went on for a while. It wasn't really until I'd say senior year of high school, that I kind of had like an oh shit moment. I think, you know, when the discussion of like college and, you know, your future starts happening, like I always knew that I wanted to go to college, and I knew, but that's really when I started to realize that I didn't want to be just like a statistic, you know. I knew that based on the life that I had, you know, had before, that if I didn't intervene in my own life and take some kind of action, that I probably would keep going down a very similar path. You know, maybe not as full blown as the one my father is on, but very, very similar.
Yeah, so the oh shit moment was just sort of realizing that you're maybe entering this transitional phase of young adulthood in like your teenage years, and seeing that like, oh, actually maybe the future I want for myself won't be possible if I keep drinking and smoking weed at the level that I'm doing it at currently. Is that right?
Yeah, and it was it kind of got to a point where, like, among my friends, I was the one who could, like, outdrink everyone and still be the most, like, responsible one in the group. So it's like when we were out doing, you know, things we shouldn't be doing in the middle of the night, even though I was the one who had drank the most, I was still the one who was, like, you know, responsible for everybody and, like, made sure that we all, you know, didn't go to jail and made it home and all that stuff. And then I was like, wow, that's, you know, not the best. That's really not.
You're seeing your own little red flags kind of waving in the wind.
Yeah, I was like, if I am the one who has drank the most and I am the most responsible one, maybe my tolerance for alcohol is much higher than everyone else's, because everyone else is still in the, like, you know, oh, have like 2 beers and is like wasted, you know, and it's like, I've, you know, had a quarter of a half of a bottle of vodka and I'm, you know, somehow the most sober one here. And then I was like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do after the legal age of 21. That's how you're supposed to be after the legal age of 21.
And you're in high school at this point?
Yeah, I'm in high school.
So how did you, after you had the aha moment, what did you do after that?
I, you know, obviously, like, we still, you know, drank and stuff on the weekends, but I've always loved school. I've always taken school seriously. That was, like, my safe haven growing up was school. And at this point, it's, like, junior, senior year, and I just, you know, I was like, I need to take this as seriously as possible. And because I know that, you know, I want to go to college and I want to, you know, take this as seriously as possible. So, you know, I did my best junior, senior year, you know, got the college applications going, you know, all that good stuff, and started, you know, researching schools and programs and really figuring out what I wanted to do. And I tried to just make my focus, you know, my academics. That was really what saved me, is knowing that, you know, I have the ability to take this as seriously as possible. Like, I can either take it seriously or not. Mm-hmm. And taking it seriously is what's, you know, going to keep me out of all this other stuff.
So that's kind of like perhaps your response to, like, triggers or cravings at that time was like, oh, well, I know I could go out and party, but I know that's not going to be aligned with my goals, so I need to take my academics seriously. Yeah. Were you experiencing cravings and stuff at that point? Would you describe it that way? So
this was also the period of the COVID pandemic. So my sister had moved home from freshman year of college, so my sister was back at home. And, you know, being locked in the house with, like, no access to the outside world is really helpful, you know, for preventing your accessibility to, you know, buying weed from the dealer and, you know, going to the liquor store and all this stuff. So having my sister at home, you know, was really important to me. And I think that helped me a lot because, you know, I saw that she was struggling. Everybody was struggling during that time. Mm-hmm. But I had her, you know, back at home, and that was extremely, extremely helpful for me. I wouldn't say that I got to the point of, you know, drinking where it was like I felt like I needed to, you know, to get by. But there was definitely moments where I was like, damn, I could really use some alcohol right now. Mm-hmm. I could really use a drink. You know, and my sister being in college, you know, was like, oh, I'll just, you know, go get us a bottle of wine or something. So, you know, throughout COVID, like, we did have those little moments. But I also had a mom who, I wouldn't say encouraged drinking, but was like, I would rather you just, like, drink at home if you're going to do it at all. Obviously, I had been doing it long before that. But when I got to that, like, 16, 17 age, you know, she's like, if you want to have a beer out of the fridge, like, you can have a beer, you know, as long as you just do it at home. So, I got by. I was still drinking, but I had definitely tamed down the want or the urge to feel like, I had to do it to get by.
And did you quit smoking weed entirely at that point, or just also slow down with that as well?
Just slow down. I actually still smoke weed now, and I still drink now. But I've definitely tremendously slowed that down. Now that, I saw my potential for substance abuse, drug abuse, alcohol abuse very, very young. So, after the world kind of returned back to normal and I was able to go about my senior year at school, I still did, drink and smoke, but it definitely was not as much as I had done before. And then, of course, when you get to college, drinking is the culture. It's a social agent. It's a tool. That's how you get by in social situations, especially, going to a very large SEC school. That's the thing that you do. So freshman year, I kind of struggled just seeing all these people around me, like, let's go out and party. Like, to them, it's their first taste of freedom.
Yeah, and you're like, I tasted already.
Yeah, I was like, I have been here, unfortunately done this already. And so I still did go out with my friends, and, they were drinking, way more than I was. I was, at that point, I had my nights, but for the most part, it was like, I was just carrying around a can or a drink just to, like, have something to hold, when I'm in that situation, because, who are you to be the only person without a drink in your hand in a room full of drunk people?
Totally.
Yeah.
How did it feel when you were seeing everyone get super drunk, but you were moderating?
Honestly, secondhand embarrassment for them and myself. I was like, is this this is how I looked to other people when I was doing this? And honestly, it kind of made me feel better about myself. I was like, you know what? I'm glad I'm not out here making a fool of myself. I'm glad my friends are having fun and they're enjoying this, but you guys look crazy right now. Not even my friends, just everybody. And so at that point, I was the person who was, like, the responsible one, but I wasn't, drinking way more than other people.
Yeah.
And so it honestly made me feel good. I was like, wow, I am responsible. I'm, holding my own. I know my limits. I can have my 1 to 2 drinks and, like, feel satisfied. I didn't feel like I had to take it to the extreme. And I don't really know, like, what it was, but I just got to a point where I was okay with that. I was just okay with it.
So you have 1 or 2 drinks, and the thing doesn't happen to you where the only thing you want is more?
For a while it did. And then that's when, like, smoking weed helps. Like, I have 1 to 2 drinks and I'm like, oh, like, I could really, have some more, and it wouldn't hurt to have another one. But then I just would smoke a little bit of weed and then I'm like, okay, I'm good, So yeah, it was a two-way street with the drinking and the weed. I feel like the weed was okay to an extent because I knew I was still smoking a lot less than other people. Mm-hmm. Not that you should compare yourself to others, but based on what I had seen, I was still smoking a lot less than other people. And if that was keeping me from being blacked out on fraternity row, then I was okay with that.
That's a win.
Yeah, that was a win in my book. So, definitely I chose the smoking weed over excessive drinking. But, I'd even talked to my mom about it, and she's like, I'd honestly rather you smoke weed than be an alcoholic, at least, weed you can moderate a little bit easier than alcohol for some people.
And it typically doesn't make your whole personality go haywire.
No.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be anxious and mean and, the next morning when I wake up, and I'm not going to be disgustingly sick and ill, and it's more of it was a relaxer for me.
And how does the life of moderation feel for you now? Is it something that you're comfortable with, that you're happy with? Is abstinence your ultimate goal, or how are you feeling about a life of moderate use right now?
Yeah, honestly, I feel really happy with where I'm at. I still do drink on occasion, but I can go weeks, months, I could, really stop. I could see myself just not drinking. I do still drink, but, I found that spot where it's I can have, 1 or 2 drinks and just call it a night, And so I do drink, definitely not very often. I would say maybe one weekend, 1 or 2 weekends out of the month, if my friends are having a birthday party or, something, or if I go out to eat or something. Turning 21 was, I just turned 21 not that long ago. So definitely since I've turned 21, I'm, if we go out to eat somewhere, I'll order a glass of wine or something. But that's all that I'll have, and I feel comfortable with that. I feel, in control. I feel, I don't feel like I'm using it as a crutch or anything like that. Alcohol is poison. It's poison for your body. So I could definitely see myself not drinking at some point in my life. I don't really know when, that would be, but at least, right now I'm comfortable with how much I'm drinking and I feel in control.
Yeah. And now that you're into adulthood, I'm curious about all those things that you said you were burying as a teenager with your use of alcohol and weed, the grief of that death of your great grandma, and obviously the depression you were speaking about, and the troubling emotions I'm sure that came along with having your father be in such severe addiction as you were growing up. Have you been able to address those emotional issues? Have you gotten into therapy? Have you explored any of that stuff as an adult?
Yes. So as soon as I moved out of the house and came to college, so my freshman year of college was my sister's senior year of college, and we decided to live together that year. And honestly, had I not lived with my sister that year, I would probably still be doing the drinking and the partying and the craziness. Because, my whole life, my sister has been my rock. She's played such a big role in taking care of me, and she felt responsible for me, from a very young age. She felt responsible for me, and we felt responsible for each other. Even though I was the younger sibling, we've always played a part in taking care of each other. And having my sister so close to me, my first year out of the house, was the biggest blessing I really could have asked for. And that was really when we started to process those things together and put those pieces together, is, just sitting down on the couch at night with my sister and having those conversations. We did that frequently. And that was really the most that I had been able to open up and kind of start dissecting and unraveling all of those things that happened to us. And that's really when I started to see that, my previous behaviors of the teenage rage and rebellion, and, even the way that I treat myself and, my relationships, not even, romantically, but friendships and, also romantically, and the type of people I find myself attracted to, are a product of not addressing those issues. So that's really was my first realization of, there were long-term consequences of that, and this is how it's really showing up in my life. And that was also the time, my sister was struggling with alcohol as well. And that was kind of another oh shit moment for me, is seeing, living with my sister, seeing her struggle with alcohol, and then her being the one to take charge in her life as well, and look at me and say, like, I need you to help me. And, like, I need to do something about this. Yeah. And, it was after that my sister, started getting help for her, problems that she had been having. And then not long after that, I hadn't started therapy or anything yet. My main priority was just, my sister had said it's time for me to, do something about this. And so at that point, it was just getting my sister what she needed, and I kind of lived vicariously through her at that point. And so she had, gotten to see a psychologist, a psychiatrist, all that jazz. And she was ultimately diagnosed with PTSD and, anxiety, depression, all those things. Yeah. And seeing my sister get that diagnosis, it was the first time that I felt validated for all the shit that I've ever lived through. That was real. Yeah. Like, I do have PTSD, And so seeing her take that journey and take that step in her mental health, I was like, you know what? I probably also have PTSD. Yeah. And so that's when I started, I got an appointment, started seeing a therapist, a clinician, I guess. So, we are diagnoses twins. But yeah, I, started realizing that all those things were very much real. The PTSD is real. The anxiety, the, depression, those were all there for a long time. And just having that diagnosis was really validating, very affirming.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially because when you reached out when you were a teenager to try to get help, and you were denied the help and sort of just told, like, oh, people got worse problems than you, like, that is painful and that was buried inside of you. And then when someone says, no, the pain that you went through is real and it is currently affecting your life, like, yeah, that the validation is just immensely healing.
Yeah. So I have been in therapy for going on like a year now. I, take my anti-anxiety meds, and that has also really helped with the drinking as well, because you're not supposed to drink when you take SSRIs, and if you do, you need to know how it affects your body, and you need to know your limits, because if you don't, then you will end up, in a very bad situation, a very bad state. So that's also helped me a lot with knowing myself and knowing my body and knowing my relationship with alcohol. Has been, taking anti-anxiety medication, and it's helped. It's helped tremendously, We, in my family, it was like, you don't need a pill for anything, like, you don't need to get reliant on painkillers. You also don't need to get reliant on antidepressants, because that's just gonna, turn you into an addict, But at first, I kind of felt guilty, of like, I'm relying on a pill, to make me feel better. So really, am I any better, But it wasn't until my therapist, like, helped walk me through that, like, you have been denied this care, and like you deserve to take care of yourself in whatever way you need. And if you need a little 20 milligrams of Prozac every day to help you, then that's okay, you know? And so it took me a while to break myself out of that mindset of like, you know, I don't need to be relying on a pill, you know? I can just toughen up and get through it. But the reality is you can't always do that, because trauma does affect your brain. It changes your brain. And, you know, if you need 20 milligrams of Prozac every morning to help you, then take that 20 milligrams.
Get after it. Yeah, I'm glad you found a therapist that helps you and a medication that helps you as well. There's no shame in taking psych meds if you need them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm also curious, we are getting near the end of our time. I'm wondering if you would share with the listeners if there's something you think people don't understand about addiction.
Yeah, I would say as a child of an addict, I think we get this impression in our minds that addicts are bad people. And if I could say one thing, it's that people suffering from addiction do bad things. But people suffering from addiction are not bad people. It is easy to equate bad behavior with judging someone's personhood and deeming them a bad person, you know, a societal reject, whatever, you know. Addicts do bad things, but they are not bad people, always. You know, I'll leave that judgment up to you. You know, if someone has been a bad person, you know, maybe they are a bad person. But addiction is very, very real. And it makes people do things that they might not otherwise do. And that's something I've, you know, struggled to understand throughout my life, is I automatically want to, you know, think, oh, my dad, you know, he doesn't love me, doesn't want me, you know, he's just a deadbeat dad, you know, all this stuff. But at the end of the day, he's suffering, and his addiction has made him do things and choose things that I think he otherwise wouldn't if it wasn't for addiction.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you said you saw the sparkle in his eyes when he had those moments of being substance-free, and when he was at his best, he did want to go play with you out in the yard. So, yeah, that makes sense. I'm also wondering if you could speak to someone who's maybe in the thick of their addiction, if they're struggling, like right now in this very moment, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say that your loved ones and your people, they don't want you to suffer. I hope that they understand, you know, the source of your suffering and the reason why you're suffering. But no one wants you to suffer, and no one wants to see you suffer. And people are there to help you. You know, it's the times when you do not want help that people want to help you the most. So if you're feeling like, I don't need help, I don't want help, F you, get off me, you know, leave me alone, that's when people want to help you the most. And it's once you get past that point that people want to help you less. When you've exhausted them and things like that is when your loved ones will start to push away. And I mean, in my experience, that's the reality. So I would say it's okay that you're suffering, but people are there to help you. And as much as you want to despise their help, take advantage of it. Take advantage of it as much as possible.
Yeah, while it's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming and speaking with me today. It's been really nice.
Thank you so much for having me.
Recovery Demystified is produced and edited by me, Early Brunner. Stevie Pettit made our logo. Our social media manager is Kaylee Bausch. Logan Bragg wrote our beautiful theme music. We are entirely supported by donations as a 501c3 nonprofit. Your tax-deductible donations can be made to our Venmo or to our PayPal at Recovery Demystified. May you be happy and free, dear listener.